Hey everyone, I think we're live. My name is Angela Ramirez. Welcome to the No Man's Land. This is my YouTube channel, and this podcast video will also be going up on Spotify and everywhere else that you find your podcasts. Today I am going to be talking about what I've been working on the past week. Many of you guys who follow this channel regularly know that I haven't posted in probably about a week, and that is for a very good reason. I have been very, very busy digging into the Denver shooting case and really doing some hardcore investigative work into what happened that day, who was involved, what their political ideologies were, and whether or not they fueled what happened that day. So before we get into all of my research on this topic, I'm just going to do a really brief overview for those of you guys who have not paid attention to what happened here in Colorado. So on October 10th, little over, it's about 2 weeks now, on October 10th, there was a patriot muster that was scheduled by basically patriots, people who love this country and have been very frustrated by how much hate the founding of the country and its values have been receiving from the left. So this patriot muster was organized by an individual by the name of John Tigan. He is a Benghazi veteran. He was one of the people who protected the embassy in Benghazi. So he organized this patriot muster, and in response to the muster, the Denver Communists, which is an Antifa group, organized a counter-protest. Now, those of you guys who have been following Antifa, you know that a counter-protest isn't people standing peacefully with signs. It is typically along the lines of aggression and hostility towards police as well as other protesters. So, Antifa and Black Lives Matter protest, essentially. I mean, that was what the marketing material came out as, was Antifa BLM soup drive. They called it a soup drive and they marketed it as a soup drive, but if you were to review the footage of what happened that day, it's very clear that they weren't just handing out hot meals and giving out books like they said that they would. That's not what happened. As a result of, I don't want to say as a result of their protest per se, but what happened that day was an individual by the name of Jeremiah Elliott walked over to the Patriot side. He kind of infiltrated the Patriot side. And he was basically just going around looking to pick arguments and antagonize people who were in attendance at the muster. Now, just moments before the shooting happened, on video, Jeremiah Elliott is seen arguing with the victim, Lee Keltner. There was a number of news individuals taking pictures and videotaping the incident, as well as everyday citizens with their phones out recording what had happened. Now, in the video, we see Jeremiah Elliott and Lee Keltner, who is the victim, kind of having a back and forth of words. However, Jeremiah Elliott, at least from what we see in the video footage that is available as of today, was very much pushing the other person's buttons. He was very much trying to get a rise and a reaction out of him. Now, today, Elliott has said in multiple interviews that he was just standing his ground and he was just, advocating for his rights. But if you were to watch the video, it's very clear that that's not really what was happening. And when you look at Elliott's actions throughout the day, that the fact that he was picking fights with many individuals, both, of lighter complexion and dark complexion, he was looking to antagonize people that entire day. And it just so happened that he also antagonized Lee Keltner moments before he was shot. And from what I have reviewed of the footage, the reason that the shooting happened was largely in part due to the environment of hostility that Elliott basically created that day. So I don't know if I have the video pulled up just yet, but we might get there. What I think is important to note is that had Elliott not had been antagonizing people on that side of the fence, right, that it's very unlikely that tensions would have rose to the level that they did that resulted in the shooting. Now, for those of you who don't know what happened in regards to the shooting, basically, Elliott and the victim were fighting back and forth, and then the victim realized that one of the 9 News reporters had been recording him. And so he walked over to that reporter while he was in the middle of an argument with Elliott. He left the argument, walked over to where the reporter was, and I think he said something along the lines of, "Get that camera out of my effing face." I could be wrong on that. That's not a verbatim quote, but he said something along those lines and kind of moved to get the camera out of his face. At that point, the 9 News reporter, who had a private security guard with him, and in this instance, 9 News is saying that it was a private security guard, but in reality, it was a bodyguard. The individual was not responsible for protecting property, merchandise. He was really just there to protect one individual, which is the definition of a bodyguard. Now, that said, when Keltner came over to the reporter and said, "Get that effing thing out of my face," or whatever it was exactly that he said, something along those lines, I want to be fair here and say that, he didn't ask nicely. He was agitated. He was just in an argument with an individual who was clearly trying to get a rise out of him and being recorded while he was in that argument. He was not happy about it. However, he was not threatening or menacing in any way, at least from the footage that I have reviewed myself, and I have reviewed quite a bit of footage. So, with that said, what happened next was the bodyguard, who is Matthew Doloff, he basically stepped in the way of Lee Keltner, and this is where it gets a little hard to identify exactly what happened frame by frame. That said, what we know happened was that Lee Keltner, who was the victim, raised mace at roughly the same time that Matthew Doloff, the shooter, raised a firearm. Now, any reasonable person acknowledges that mace versus deadly firearm is an unfair match, that you do not, under any circumstances, pull a firearm on somebody who is threatening you with mace. You do not use deadly force against somebody who is using less than lethal force. Okay? Now, obviously Matthew Doloff is going along with the defense of it was self-defense. Whether or not that will hold up in court is, in my opinion, unlikely. However, that is what's going on. So, now that we know basically what happened, I would like to go into the research that I've been doing on this case, and it has been very extensive. Not only have I gone into Matthew Doloff's social media history, but I've also gone into Jeremiah Elliott, who was the agitator that day. I've also looked into the reporter who was assigned to Matthew Doloff, which is Zack Newman. One thing I forgot to mention when I was going into Matthew Doloff, the shooter, is that we now know that 9 News actually contracted him through Pinkerton, who then contracted him through a company called Isborne Security. Now, Isborne Security, they have actually deleted their Facebook, which is interesting. 9 News, the photojournalist who captured all these pictures from that day, she has deleted her Twitter account. She deleted her Twitter account the day after. So, in my opinion, you don't typically delete social media accounts unless you have something to hide or you're, deeply concerned about backlash for wrongdoing, perhaps. That said, it is kind of suspicious that they would go ahead and delete their accounts on such a short notice. So I'm going to go into, obviously, the fact that Matthew Doloff was an unlicensed security guard. He did not have a license to operate at all as a security guard in Denver. On top of that, Denver requires plainclothes security guards to have a special license to walk around without a uniform. And furthermore, they also require an additional license for armed security. So not only was he missing one license, he was missing the 2 additional prerequisites to be able to offer that service legally. The owner of Isborne Security issued a statement saying that he has been employing Matthew Doloff since 2019, that he's never had an issue, and none of his other clients have complained about Doloff's work history. Obviously, we know that Matthew Doloff was operating without proper credentials and killed a man at point-blank range when there was no true concern of being killed himself. So, I think I'm going to start with 9 News, because they are the ones who employed or they didn't employ him, they contracted him through a third party who then contracted him through another organization, which is really strange. That said, let's get into 9 News's reporter. His name is Zack Newman. This is him. He can be seen here with 2 phones. This is literally seconds before the shooting happened. As you can see, he's looking at something over to the left of the frame. What he's looking at is actually Lee Keltner. This individual here in the corner with his hat sideways, he's getting hit. That's Matthew Doloff, and he's getting kind of pushed. I think he actually got slapped in the face by Lee Keltner when he got in the way between him and the reporter. So he got slapped in the face and then pulled out his gun and shot. Obviously, clearly an untrained response. So this is Zack Newman here that we're going to go into. One of the things that a lot of people in Colorado have been pointing out is that 9 News had an obvious bias towards any sort of right-wing views. They regularly discussed the threat of white supremacy in Colorado while completely ignoring the fact that Denver was being marauded through by radical left anarcho-communists, including Black Lives Matter, the Party of Socialism and Liberation, as well as the Denver Communists, which is an Antifa group, as I mentioned before. So, this is an article that I wrote. Everything that we're going to go over today is articles that I've written in the past, 2 weeks, about this specific incident. Before we get into it, guys, I do just want to say that if you enjoy this work, please consider going to thenomanzone.com and subscribing to our mailing list. If you do subscribe to the mailing list, you're the first person to get updated with new articles. They're always exclusive articles. It's always in-depth research that we conduct here ourselves. You can also donate there if you so choose. If you really enjoy this work, please help keep me a journalist by donating what you can, whether it's $5 or something else. Also, another way to help this channel is by sharing us. You can let your friends know, share the link, or find me on Twitter and retweet some of my work. My personal handle is CO Angela Ramirez, and Ramirez is Ramirez. So, with that said, let's get into this article here, and it is specifically about 9 News' Zack Newman, the reporter who was on the ground that day. Many individuals who were there and were eyewitnesses claim that 9 News had been following the agitator throughout the day. They believed that many people have come forward and said that Jeremiah Elliott, who was the agitator walking around the Patriot side, pretty much trying to pick fights with people, they were saying that 9 News was following this guy pretty much all day, that they seemed to have been shadowing one another, which is obviously unconfirmed at this point whether or not there was a relationship there. Jeremiah Elliott and 9 News both declined that they had any sort of working relationship in a security capacity. However, in Jeremiah Elliott's interviews, he did refer to 9 News as our news company, which is quite strange, and he's not just done it once, he's done it twice. So that's something that needs to be looked into. And it is something that I am looking into. That said, let's get into the article. I'm going to just read it for you guys. I think I do a pretty good job of explaining it. So I'm just going to go ahead and read. And let's get started. There's a few videos, so if you have the ability to watch this video instead of listen, that might be beneficial. But if you can only just listen, I'll play the videos and then I'll explain what's in the videos after. Okay, so let's get started with this article. Here we go. Zack Newman, a self-described investigative data reporter for 9 News, was thrown into the spotlight after his unlicensed but armed security detail, Matthew Doloff, shot and killed Lee Keltner at a Patriot muster in Denver. Newman has spent the bulk of his professional career as an anchor and behind-the-scenes desk analyst, but in 2016, he favorably covered protests fueled by critical race theory and communist ideology that closely resemble the radicalized Black Lives Matter rhetoric circulating through radical left activist groups today. And during his short time at 9 News, Newman aided in a series called Homegrown Hate, a program that outlined hate groups in Colorado, but the program had serious bias issues. Specifically, it covered exclusively right-wing terror and hate groups while completely failing to provide the active radical left profile the active radical left advocacy plaguing Denver. Fast forward to October 10th, and the investigative data reporter, with a history of ignoring violent communist action while overplaying the threat of right-wing biased crimes, found himself standing alongside an unlicensed and partisan security guard who had just murdered someone in broad daylight at a harmless patriot muster. So, let's get into Newman's history. Here we see that he favorably covered the early days of radical leftist advocacy. This is a post from his Facebook page. Here we see a number of individuals lined up on what looks like a stage. Everybody's wearing a raised fist t-shirt or sweater. For those who aren't aware, the raised fist is basically a communist symbol that has been used throughout history of communist revolutions. Let's continue to read. While working for KOMU in 2016, Newman covered protests organized by a leftist student body group, Concerned Students of 1950. His coverage amplified the propagandistic talking points distributed by the student group, but ignored the obvious extremist philosophy that was the driving force of the movement. This is down here a tweet of their story, basically, of Concerned Student 1950. I'm not going to read it all because it's pretty long, and it's on the site if you choose to read it, and I do give a brief overview of what they're about, which is what we're going to get into now. So, a brief overview of Concerned Student 1950. Created in response to a series of unacceptable racial slurs made to a handful of students on campus, Concerned Student 1950 felt that racism was alive on their campus and that it was a result of what critical race theory dubs systemic white supremacy and the white patriarchy. In addition to utilizing communist artwork, specifically the raised fist, the demands, protest tactics, and arguments brought up by the student group are almost exactly the same as those leveraged by Marxist Black Lives Matter protesters we see today. Some of their critical race theory demands included the fundamental premise of critical race theory that everything in the U.S. is based on racism, and thus all systems must be dismantled and fixed to create true equity. Therefore, Concerned Student 1950 demanded increased equity training for the staff, the hiring of more minority faculty members, and the resignation of the school's dean among other demands. Now, this is what I find most interesting, perhaps, is the tactical similarities that Concerned Student 1950 used. These similarities are very closely related to what we see happening in the Black Lives Matter movement today. So, Concerned Student 1950 blocked the moving vehicle of the school's dean, Tim Wolf, from continuing down the road. When the surrounded driver attempted to continue, they actually threw themselves in front of the moving vehicle and accused the dean of caring more about his material property, the car, than their feelings. They claimed that the dean, not the protesters, throwing themselves in front of a moving vehicle was responsible, basically, for the damage. Below is an excerpt about that incident. I'm just going to read a very short segment of this because I think that it really does, it resembles very closely the radical protest tactics that are being used by Black Lives Matter organizers today. So let's go ahead and read just this very short center part here. Quote, as Tim Wolf's driver began to go around us, we moved the line in front of the vehicle and even allowed some of our bodies to be hit to ensure we were heard. Multiple men and women from the crowd then forcefully positioned themselves in between us and the vehicle, exclaiming, "This is a man's car," and "Move," because they believed our tactics were threatening to property. Yes, to them, the car was more important than our message. One of those men even went as far as to say, "You know you're part of the problem, right? And this isn't helping y'all's cause." Moments later, the same car containing Tim Wolf hit a man from our group twice. In that moment, when Tim Wolf's voice was crucial for creating an inclusive environment, he allowed violence to occur. As our last speaker finished the demonstration, a few spectators linked arms with us in solidarity. I'm going to end it right there. So that's the end of the quote. I think it is really interesting to point out that there are a lot of similarities between what that statement says and what we're seeing in the Black Lives Matter movement. First of all, that they are forcibly surrounding people in vehicles to like get their message through. That's something that we have been seeing in the Black Lives Matter movement for months now. Second of all, they actually admit that they threw their bodies in front of a moving vehicle to get their point across. Again, that's something that we have seen nationwide in Black Lives Matter protests today. And finally, people today in the Black Lives Matter movements, a lot of these advocates will claim that people are more concerned about property than the message of their movement. And this has been utilized with vehicles. It's been utilized with homes. This is what the argument was in Kenosha, when Kenosha was basically had a direct action attack that burned down a significant portion of the city. This idea that it's okay to destroy property because the message is more important has been used by Black Lives Matter advocates, nationwide. And here it is in 2016, that same ideology in 2016 on a college campus. So, it's important to note that Zack Newman covered this. He wrote an article about it. He did not point out that this was a radicalized movement. Now, personally, I focus on Marxist influence in politics, but another thing that I like to look at is corporate involvement in politics as well, because, typically, large businesses, people who contribute and lobby, not necessarily, but typically a lot of businessmen are right-wing. They're more conservative, at least fiscally, right? And one of the things that I think is important is if I was at a rally, let's say I was at the soup drive where the shooting happened, and I noticed that a number of these patriots who were at the Patriot Muster were throwing themselves in front of vehicles, were, behaving in a threatening way to the public, I would personally feel absolutely responsible for conveying that information to the public, regardless of whether or not I believed that a Patriot Muster was the right thing to be doing. Regardless of my own political beliefs, regardless of what I thought needed to happen in the country, I wouldn't ignore the fact that people are becoming violent or becoming threatening and aggressive in order to promote the message that I felt was right. I feel like that's poor journalistic practice. It's also unethical, in my opinion. And I think it's really important to note that Zack Newman, he covered these protests without acknowledging the fact that it was being fueled by very radical leftist ideology. That was never something that was in his article that he published for KOMU. So moving forward, we have the next section here, which is something that he has been working on more recently and something I find very interesting and relevant to the reason he was on the ground that day. Now, I don't know for sure what segment 9 News was recording that day on the ground. Maybe they were just trying to record the Patriot Muster. Maybe they were just trying to cover the event in general. However, it's important to note that Zack Newman, for the past year since he's been at 9 News, has been covering a series he's been co-authoring it with other reporters, but he has been a member of this coverage. The series was called Homegrown Hate, right? And so the series and programming basically is about extremist groups and hate groups in Colorado. And unfortunately, it was a very, very biased program. They did not cover a single left-wing not one left-wing threat in the state, not at all. Instead, they focused on white supremacy and extremist groups that are on the right. They also went so far as to do a piece on the Proud Boys and an individual who was a 21-year-old who vandalized a bookstore after they had done a transgender all-ages drag queen event. So I'm going to get into that here. So here we have Zack Newman's Facebook post. The title on the post is White Supremacy Groups and Other Hate Organizations. are getting, it's basically saying that they're getting to be more serious in Colorado. And the caption says, the number of hate crimes in Colorado are on the rise. An analysis of Colorado court data also reveals prosecutors have been steadily charging more people with bias-motivated crimes, which can include harassment and assault. But only 32% of the time those charges resulted with an actual conviction, according to the analysis from the years 2014 to 2018. Okay, next post is also, these were actually posted like 3 consecutive days in a row, I think. So the next post said, Christian Picciolini, I'm not saying that right, Picciolini maybe, a former white supremacist, said the key to getting others out of a life of hate is building a community around the person. Basically, it's a story about a white supremacist who then abandoned that life. And good for him. I'm all for white supremacists abandoning the life of hatred. The next post is, again, about white supremacy. It says that lessons of inclusion and kindness can stop hate before it gains a foothold. It's about how experts work across Colorado to counter the spread of extremism. So, the issue that I took with this series and what I find most interesting about it is that they profiled a number of people and stories and groups, and they only focused on right-wing threats. They didn't once focus on the Party of Socialism and Liberation, who has been operating in Colorado since 2017. And, you know, it was the Party of Socialism and Liberation that surrounded Aurora Police Precinct, barricaded officers inside of the building for 7 hours, and then proceeded to surround the building with gas cans and other makeshift weapons, which essentially could have been used to light the building on fire or create a bomb. They didn't profile that organization. They only profiled right-wing groups. And when you're, you know, it's one thing to say that you are an expert in a certain type of terror or extremism, right? Like there's some people who are jihadist experts. There's some people who are, you know, experts in the Chinese Communist Party. However, this was a blanket homegrown hate series that was supposed to call out hate crimes and extremist ideology, and they completely ignored the fact that we have multiple extremist groups here in Colorado and in Denver that were operating right in their own backyard. They completely ignored it. So I feel like that's really relevant to point out. As a side note, something I didn't include in the article, but something I find strange, is that Zack Newman calls himself an investigative data reporter. Investigative data reporters look at data and then determine a story based on that data. So I'm very curious why he was actually out there on the ground doing a conflict zone, what essentially was a conflict zone when you have two combating rallies. And I don't even know that it was a combating rally, but it was a rally that was scheduled, and then the Denver Communists decided to come out and counter protests. So it could have been looked at as a combat zone. It definitely wasn't, maybe not a combat zone, but a conflict area, right? It's just strange that they would put an investigative data reporter who typically does most of his work behind the desk in a protest. Strange, right? Just strange. So anyway, like I said, the series only focused on right-wing threats. Here I kind of go into it that they did not once mention the Party of Socialism and Liberation in the Homegrown Hate series. Something else that I thought was really strange in the Homegrown Hate series is that they really did cover extremist groups such as the Atomwaffen, who are organizing in Colorado. The Atomwaffen is a legitimate neo-Nazi group and white supremacist group. They have been linked to multiple murders nationwide. I believe the number is 5 murders nationwide. And they put out terrorist propaganda. They are, in my opinion, a true neo-Nazi white supremacist group with intentions of terror. And so good on 90s for covering that. However, they also decided to lump in the Proud Boys into this series, claiming that they are a misogynistic and Islamophobic group. You can say all you want about the Proud Boys. To call them a misogynistic group is very disingenuous. It's the Proud Boys. It's a men's group. I personally would not think that it's okay to have a women's group, right? Like let's say I start the Proud Girls. Not that I have any intention of doing so, but let's just say we have a group called the Proud Girls, and people start saying it's a man-shaming group because you don't want to let men in the group. It's like, no, it's just a women's group, right? And the same is true for the Proud Boys. And the Proud Boys have many people from many ethnicities. One of the things that really struck me as strange was that they went ahead and profiled a 21-year-old man. Here's the little excerpt. They profiled a 21-year-old who had been charged with a misdemeanor bias crime for vandalizing a bookstore. The reason he vandalized that bookstore, not that it's appropriate to vandalize anybody's business, but the reason that he vandalized the bookstore was in response to their decision to run an all-ages drag queen event that was marketed for children. And so as a result of that, he vandalized the bookstore. Now, once again, it's not appropriate, in my opinion, to vandalize anybody's business as a retaliatory measure. But it does seem worth noting that it wasn't just like unwarranted, or not that I want to say unwarranted, but it's not like he said, oh, XYZ person, a gay person is running this business, I'm going to go attack that business, right? So anyway, it's just interesting that they decided to link that guy to extremist groups. It's kind of disingenuous, in my opinion. Now, okay, getting to the actual Patriot Muster, the day of the Patriot Muster, this is what I find also very interesting, is Zack Newman, when he was reporting at the Patriot Muster, he called it an event with a far-right militia. His actual tweet here, as you guys can see on the screen, I'll read it for you guys who are listening. It says, "I'm at Civic Park Center, where patriot militias with far-right views and far-left socialist and communist groups have organized opposing rallies at the same time. Public comments ahead showed the possibility to get violent. I'll thread what I'm seeing." I'm going to play the video that he took of the Patriots. I think it's interesting. Okay, so if you guys can see that there, what we see is a number of individuals. It looks like they all have matching t-shirts with, tan pants. Some of them have bulletproofs on. Some of them have plastic shields. I'll play it one more time because it was kind of hard to see. But, it's a group of maybe, 25, maybe 30 people. Might be a little less than that. But basically, he videotaped a group of people in, tactical garb, somewhat tactical garb. Nobody has any assault rifles on them. Denver, you can't carry an assault rifle. It's a little different from the rest of Colorado. But, the reason that I point out that he posted this video is because he took a video of what you would consider a right-wing militia. And I'm not even sure that you would call them right-wing militia without being able to identify what group they're with. But he's pointing out that there's a group of right-wingers marching together, right? And they're not even marching. They're just kind of walking loosely through the street. He never once uploaded a video of the Denver communists who were all there in black bloc, which means that they had black face masks on. They were covering all of their body to prevent identification. They did have shields as well. They also brought, soup cans to throw at people, which they did. It's just, it's biased reporting when you only show one side coming like this, right? And this group here that we see walking was a very small fraction of all of the attendees. Many of the attendees, including the organizer, John Tigan, showed up in jeans and a t-shirt. Okay, nobody was trying to hide their face. Nobody was trying to hide their identity. That's a very stark contrast to the fact that a number of the people on the Denver communist side showed up in tactical gear, right? It was just all black. It was just a different kind of tactical gear. And in my opinion, their tactical gear was much more threatening because they could not be identified. None of these individuals you see on the screen here were hiding their face. Not one. I don't want to say almost all, but a very large number of the people who showed up from the Denver Communists were wearing black bloc. They were hiding their faces. They were trying not to be identified and trying to maintain their secrecy. So I'm going to continue reading here. The only video illustrating radical communist groups was this one, which I'll play right now, showing a single individual lighting a flag on fire, despite the fact that Newman can be seen in this video below, capturing a large group of black bloc Antifa harassing police. That's kind of a poorly written sentence on my part, but basically what I'm saying is that he actually took a video of black bloc harassing police, and he's actually seen in the video taping these guys harass the officers, but he never uploaded that video. Instead, the only thing he uploaded, the only visual proof of this group that he uploaded, shows a single individual in tactical gear burning a flag. Now, the reason I want to point that out, he only took a video of one person dressed like this is because there was many people dressed like that. There was many individuals dressed in all black tactical gear, making threatening and hostile gestures at police. There was a very large group of them. And for him to only show one person, he's kind of minimizing the reality of what was happening there. He's minimizing the fact that there was a large group of people in black bloc harassing and being threatening towards police. You know, when you show a whole group of people that you claim to be a right-wing militia marching together, and then only upload a single individual acting out on the opposite side, you are minimizing the threat of the left and overemphasizing the threat of what you would consider the right. You know, here we have one person. You can see there's just one other person in not necessarily black bloc because he's wearing a red mask, but you know, he's taking the same precautions. Anyway, I'm going to show you guys the stark contrast between what happened on the Patriot side and what happened on the Denver Communist side. I'm going to show you the Patriot side first.
We love you! We love you! We love you! We love you!
So they're actually chanting, "We love you," to these guys over here, who are all acting basically like angry children, the communists. So literally we have a video of the Patriots sending their love to the Denver Communists, and this is how the Denver Communists act in contrast, okay? Taking a minute to load.
Fucking pussies! Fucking pussies! Y'all are fucking bitches! Oh my god, overpaid bitches!
Fucking fascist!
Yeah, you're a jackbooted fucking Nazi!
So you see they're hiding their faces.
Yeah, you! This sergeant's a fucking Nazi! I asked if he had a swastika, he looked right at me. He's got one at home. You should be a fucking shame to yourself! Hit me like you hit your wife! You fucking fascist! You fucking race traitor! You fucking Get the fuck out of here!
Fuck you! Bounce, motherfucker! Fuck you,
I'm gonna back this video up just a little bit. Because right here you can see multiple black bloc. There's one, there's another one. if I were to play this whole video, you would see that there was actually a pretty big group of probably about 50 to 60 people in this crowd screaming at police. So it's a very big difference. Here we have people who are hiding their faces in the Denver communists. They're making harassing and threatening gestures towards police, trying to belittle the police. And then on the Patriot side, you have people screaming, "We love you," to the Denver communists. Pretty big difference. Now, the next thing I want to point out before I go on to the next little segment here is that this was not a far-right militia event. As much as Zack Newman would like to paint it out to be a far-right militia event, it is not. It was marketed as a patriot muster. Literally, the founding individuals' post to market it said, "BLM, Antifa, and related Marxist associations are assaulting everything we love and cherish about this country. Their narrative supports dismantling the system, which leads to anarchy. Anarchy in our streets leaves good citizens to be attacked." And it does continue on. However, it's kind of cut off here in this tweet. But basically, it's marketed as an attempt to bring everybody together and just stand up and be proud of this country. That is not a patriot muster. And, Zack Newman, he pointed out, like, in this tweet here, he said, "I'm trying to get into the patriot side." So he couldn't get into the patriot side. He's saying they're not letting anybody in. But he eventually did get in, and it's unclear how. But he said, "For those trying to dunk on me in my mentions, the event is literally called a patriot muster." As if trying to say that, it is a militia event, right? Well, let's look at what patriot and muster means, okay? You would think that Zack Newman, being a journalist, would understand to look into the definition of words before making blanket accusatory statements, but that's not the case. So let's look at patriot. Patriot means one who loves and supports his or her country. That is the definition from Merriam-Webster. So, patriot doesn't seem to have any political connotation. It just means that you love your country and you support your country, okay? That is not political in nature, unless you are part of a ideology or group that believes that the country is evil, which apparently Zack Newman seems to think that patriot is some sort of political connotation. Now, muster can be occasionally used as a military term. It does mean a representative specimen. It can mean an act of assembling, of a formal military inspection. However, if we actually look at what happened there in that video I show you where everybody's yelling, "We love you," everybody's in like casual clothing, with the exception of a very small group who had shields and matching t-shirts and pants. This is not a military inspection by any... You would have to really, really stretch your imagination to call this a military inspection. Instead, we see that definition C is an assembled group. It's a collection of people. It is an act of assembling. And, it's just semantics to try and explain this as a military event. Now, this brings me to the end of this specific article. I'm going to go into Jeremiah Elliott just really briefly. But at the end of this article, one of the things that I pointed out was Newman on the hunt for any sign of white supremacy that day? Was he moving to the patriot side away from where most of the conflict was happening on the Denver communist side? On the hunt for people who were white supremacists, because we know that he had been working on a Homegrown Hate series that only profiled people on the right. And for him to try and get into the patriot side when he had posted actually that he was unable to because there was police and they were blocking him and anybody else from going over to that side. It makes me wonder why he would choose to go over to the patriot side when there was really no conflict. It was really just people walking around and talking with one another, with the exception of Jeremiah Elliott, who was over there riling people up. He was over there trying to start arguments with people, and it just so happened that the news individuals were also there to capture that. And instead of publishing the videos of the Denver communists arguing with police, yelling at police, all dressed in black bloc, we know that they had comms there. We know they had a digital security team there because one of their members posted that on Periscope. Instead of covering what is considered definitely a radical extremist group, he decided to move over to the Patriot side, where he could possibly have found a few white supremacists who attended. And look, I'm not going to deny the fact that there are people who are white supremacists in Colorado. There's people who believe in the one superiority of another race throughout the country, and that's evil, that's wrong, it's not right. Unfortunately, you just can't get rid of everybody who believes that way, right? Like, there's always going to be people who are evil. There's always going to be people who think in ways that are unproductive. And what can you do? You can't just lock everybody up who thinks a certain way. We've seen that, that doesn't work. And so there's a possibility that there might have been a few people there, but, it's not like it was organized by white supremacists. It's not like it was organized for neo-Nazis. It was organized for everyday patriots who love this country to come together and basically talk to one another and wave flags and get to know everybody. It wasn't a white supremacist militia muster. Anyway, so it just, at the end of this article, I raised the question of, was Newman there to look for white supremacy? Was he there to minimize the real threat and aggression displayed by the Denver Communists and the Black Bloc Antifa, while there to amplify what his news station had been covering for over a year, which is right-wing extremism? So it's worth a question. I'm going to move on now just very briefly to the agitator, Jeremiah Elliott, who's this individual. He was seen, obviously, at the soup drive. I don't know if I have the video up here. He was seen at the soup drive. Here we go. Here's a picture of him there. So he was seen on the Patriot side. He was at the soup drive earlier in the day and then crossed over to the Patriot side. So people right away said, oh no, this wasn't related to Antifa. There was nothing to do with Antifa. That's actually not true. The individual who escalated tensions that day that led to the shooting, I mean, literally, he was escalating the tensions of the scene, literally seconds before anything had happened. He's basically an Antifa commander. In my opinion, he is a commander, and I think that there's plenty of video footage to support that claim. Here is a picture of Elliott, leading the chants for Black Bloc Antifa and the Denver Communists outside of the Denver Police Precinct. And this event was actually organized by Denver Communists. Like I said, they're an Antifa group. Here is their little tag from Facebook. Now, just really quickly, let's go through this article because there's a few more things I want to touch on. So, quote, Jeremiah Elliott, who was caught on camera arguing with multiple Patriot Muster attendees the day Lee Keltner was killed, recently conducted an interview with 9 News, the organization who contracted the Denver shooter. In the interview, Elliott states that he was at the Patriot Muster because he was just outside in Denver. That's literally what he said in his interview. They asked, so what were you doing in Denver that day? And he was like, oh, I was just outside in Denver. He also said that he was not a part of any group or organization. He stated in his 9 News interview that he had been photographed with a number of people throughout the day because that's just what happens when you walk around in a crowded event, right? So he was just there in Denver. He was just walking around with random people because that's what happens when you're in a crowded event. You might get photographed with a lot of different people. That was his defense. Okay, so let's get into it. Elliott was actually at the BLM Antifa soup drive. He was actually in that video that I just showed you of the Denver Communists screaming at police. He actually walked right in front of the camera. It's just he hadn't changed into the Black Guns Matter shirt yet. He was still wearing a hoodie over that shirt. So Elliott was captured on video mixed in with the Denver Communists that day prior to the shooting. He stood in front of a large group of Black Bloc Antifa and members of the Denver Communists while verbal assaults were directed at police. Let's take a look at this video. So Elliott can be seen wearing a gray Cali hoodie with a water bottle in his pant pocket as he confronts congressional candidate Casper Stockholm at the barrier between the Patriots and the Communists. Casper Stockholm, for those of you guys who are in Colorado, he is running for Congress. He's really, in my opinion, a pretty solid guy. So let's just watch this for a quick second.
Called him a race chainer. That's what he just called him. And so I was like, well, what do you expect of me? So he wants us to have different rules. That's the color of our skin.
Did your parents and grandparents ever teach you
violence on organizations who are protesting against police who have been held unaccountable?
Listen, Tim, did your parents and grandparents teach you what respect means?
Yeah, and I told you that respect is earned. You haven't earned my respect.
So there's a preacher rally today.
So I'm just going to cut it off there. Basically, they're arguing because Elliott, who was seen there in the gray hoodie and the blue bandana, he called Casper a number of racial slurs, including house brother, but he used the N-word instead. And Casper was rightfully frustrated by that, and he was saying, did your parents not teach you respect? And, you know, Elliott is basically trying to get a reaction out of him. Like, why do you go over and talk to somebody and call them racial slurs like that unless you're trying to either get a reaction out of them or you're just a rude person in general, right? So now that we pointed out Elliott's sweater, the fact that he was in a gray sweater, tan pants with a water bottle in his pocket, we can go review the footage of the Denver Communists. This is that video that I just played for you guys, but I'm going to point out a few things for you as we go along. So here, as you guys can see, we have Black Bloc. We have a number of Black Bloc individuals all the way back here behind the tree, right here. Here's the two guys that were kind of like getting in the police's face while they were burning the flag. Also, there, you know, I should have included the walk-up of the camera person on this group because it's quite a large group. But there's a number of people hiding their face. There's a number of people in Black Bloc. They're all screaming at police. And then look who shows up in the frame. Jeremiah Elliott shows up in the frame. Just give him a second to make his grand appearance.
God, overpaid bitches! Yeah, you're a jackbooted fucking Nazi!
There he is.
Yeah, you! This sergeant's a fucking Nazi!
The camera guy's gonna kind of
I asked if he had a
just
swastika
a
in
little
his
bit,
hell.
to
He's
get
got
his
one at
blue
home.
bandana
You
in
should
his
be a
frame.
fucking shame me! Hit me like you hit your wife! You fucking fascist! You fucking traitor!
So there is his bandana. You see the bandana. Now I want to just fast forward a little bit to where everybody kind of follows these officers out. I'm gonna mute the video so that I can talk over it. So here the police officers are driving away, and we actually see Zack Newman right there in the corner left of the frame. He's videotaping this. He's videotaping it happening, but he does not post it to Twitter. Even though he said he would tweet out what he's seeing, he's just capturing the footage. Who knows what he did with it. But here's Jeremiah Elliott leading away the group. He's in the very front of the group. You know, maybe he's not telling everybody to go along, but he is in the front of the group walking away, following the police officers. He has his water bottle in his hand. So he was participating on the Denver Communist side of the he was there to counter-protest. He was there seen with the group counter-protesting, screaming at police officers. So he wasn't just outside in Denver. He was actually there. He was there to participate. I'm going to play this short segment of his interview with 9 News. Just a moment.
Why were you out there that day?
I was just outside in Denver.
Well, I mean, were you attending the Patriot Muster, or were you at something else?
I was just walking around downtown Denver that day.
With that Black Guns Matter shirt on?
That was just a shirt in my closet.
All right. What's your reaction, Jeremiah, to the charges that were announced against the security guard named Matthew Doloff?
I think Matthew Doloff is a hero. I think he stepped in between what could have been ultimately a much more violent attack by that gentleman. I think he acted completely in self-defense, and I think all those charges are unwarranted, and I'm most sure that he will be found not guilty on all charges.
Did you actually see the shooting when Lee Keltner walked away from you?
So the confrontation that happened with me and him, he stepped away, and 8 seconds later, the confrontation happened in less than 8 seconds. It was a very quick confrontation. It was a violent one. Lee Keltner chose to have a violent confrontation, and it ended poorly for him. He found out in a very terrible way what happens when you do those things.
Did you actually see the shooting though?
Okay, so we're going to end it there. So this is an interview that 9 News conducted with Jeremiah Elliott. It is in full on my website, The No Man Zone, if you chose to want to watch it. But as you can hear, he said that he was just downtown, and he was just walking around downtown Denver. He wasn't there for anything. He just so happened to have come upon a communist rally and participated in it, which personally I don't usually just, like, if I saw a rally going on in Colorado Springs or Pueblo or Denver, if I was just walking around downtown and I saw a rally going on, I wouldn't get right up front and center and join in the screaming and threatening of police officers, or join in the threatening and screaming at communists or whatever it is. It's just kind of hard to believe that that's actually going to be his excuse. Anyway, that defense essentially is pretty much negated by the fact that this is not his first time appearing with the Denver Communists. As a matter of fact, he has been seen on many occasions with the Denver Communist Group. On September 11th of earlier this year, the Denver Communists actually held a justice for Antonio Blackbear, who was a Dakota native that was shot by Denver PD. I'm really not clear on the full story of what happened there. However, they held a rally for it on September 11th. Here is some posts from their Facebook and Twitter. So here's their Twitter page, if you guys can see it. It's from the Denver Communists. Here's the pamphlet or marketing flyer that was up here saying that they're going to hold a rally. Then there's some photos. Guess who's in the photos? It's Jeremiah Elliott right back here in a blue hoodie. He's right there, posted on Facebook. Did he just happen to be walking around Denver that day as well? I highly doubt it. Things are getting a little bit too coincidental. And on top of it, we actually have a video of him leading Antifa Black Bloc in their chants outside of the Denver police station. So here we go. Let's play it. Might be loud. There he is.
No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace! Say his name! Antonio Blackbear! Say his name! Antonio Blackbear! No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace! No racist! Police! No justice! No peace! No racist! Police! No law! Have we sat silent when you have enacted?
See, that doesn't just seem to be walking around downtown Denver. You don't just walk around downtown Denver and happen upon a large group of Black Bloc Antifa and they just so happen to allow you to lead them in their chants outside of the Denver police station. That doesn't really happen. Okay, so there in that video, it's pretty clear, it's like really clear that he holds some sort of respect and commanding role. He has a commanding presence among this Denver Communist group. He can deny that he is a leader of the group. As we know, Antifa groups are decentralized by nature. They are intentionally created as a leaderless group to prevent any one person from taking the brunt of legal responsibility. It's supposed to be decentralized. So is he the leader of Denver Antifa? No. Is he a commanding presence in that group? Does he command the group in certain situations? Yes, video footage shows that. Here we see him leading a group of Black Bloc Antifa and their chants outside of Denver PD. Now, that's not the only time this has happened, though. He was actually seen on video once again leading, this is a different blog that I wrote, but he was once again seen on video leading chants outside of the Aurora police station with the Denver Communist Black Bloc Antifa group. And this time they were actually acting in a militarized sense. They all had their shields. They were all in a defensive or perhaps offensive line They were all lined up. They had their shields out. They had their helmets on. They had their black bloc gear on. And Jeremiah Elliott is seen walking up and down the front line, leading chants. And not only was he leading chants by himself, he was leading chants with a man named Michael Windecker, who claims to be a Antifa, like, freedom fighter trainer. Like, this is confirmed, he went overseas to join the Peshmerga to fight ISIS, basically, in the Middle East. So he traveled overseas, he went to fight ISIS, and then he came back. And now he is trying to basically, like, lead a communist revolution in America. And here's the video. I'll show you the video. It is pretty self-explanatory. We see Jeremiah Elliott walking up and down the front lines of a militarized Antifa force, leading chants in very much a commander role. And he's walking up and down with Michael Windecker, who the cameraman later on in the video calls drill sergeant. This is very much a militarized force. He definitely is acting in some capacity as a leader of the group. Maybe he's not saying, hey, let's organize here this day. Maybe he's not saying, maybe he's not, like, running their social media pages or, organizing the combat material, but he does in some capacity act as a commander when people are out on the ground. He's calling out the chants and people are listening to him. He's walking on the front lines in front of a militarized force. Let's watch the video. Sorry, I don't know why I did that in the beginning.
Name! Say his name! Say his name!
And there's the force. Everybody is behind shields. Hard to say that he doesn't have some sort of leadership capacity with this group. So for him to say that he was just so happened to be walking around downtown Denver that day of the Patriot muster, it's just nonsense. And I'm going to finish this video off by showing you guys what he had said as he was leaving, as he was leaving the Patriot muster right after the shooting. Take a look.
One less white fucking supremacist! Fuck yeah! Right in the fucking dome! Fuck yeah!
He literally said, one less white supremacist right in the effing dome. F yeah. That's what he said minutes after walking away from a man who was shot. That he was antagonizing intentionally, in my opinion, just moments before he was killed. Jeremiah Elliott, in my opinion, contributed to, and maybe not even contributed to, essentially started the hostile situation that led to people arguing and led to Matthew Doloff feeling threatened. So with that, anyway, I'm going to